Hi, welcome to the Assessment Alchemist Podcast. I'm Tina Wiles. Thank you for joining me. Today's episode is called Normalize the Fail. And I want to share how the title came about and tell you a little bit about a catch up and give a hint at a upcoming podcast episode. So let me start with I had a podcast a couple ago, can't remember the number, with a friend of mine named Mel. And the when I met Mel, it was January 2025. So why this has come up is this past Friday was the 1 year anniversary of Mel taking her professional engineering exam. Now, that doesn't sound like it would be that momentous, but it was for a couple of reasons. Um, First of all, I'll end with the end result. So, we're celebrating because it was a year ago that she took her exam for the last time. So she took it a year ago, she passed, and amazing things have happened since then. A promotion, sold her house, moved, like basically her life had almost been on pause while she was trying to pass the certification licensing exam. And the talk with Mel on Friday inspired me to do this episode, and I'm actually inviting her to be back on to do a catch up, which I think might be one of the best episodes we've had. Now that she's completely out of it, and a year in retrospect, what she's seeing. So for those of you that are like, okay, so professional engineer, that's not the exam I'm taking. That's okay because what this topic is universal to any certification or licensing exam or standardized test or where you're trying to get um, into a program like the TEAS exam, for example. So one thing that Mel has become incredibly passionate about is the um, going from the failing, okay? And she did that 9 times. Fail, 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 fail. 9 times she failed, okay? And the 10th time, like basically after the ninth time, the last time she failed it, she was shaking so much before she started. She actually had to use two hands to start the exam. And during the test, she was already trying to figure out where and when she was going to take it again. Okay. She was planning on failing. So, um, what we talked about a lot this past week when I met was she's taking normalize the fail as like her mission, right? This is what she wants to help people with because the stigma and embarrassment that comes from failing an exam can be like overwhelming, right? It can result in not going on to work towards your dreams, right? I can't tell you how many people that I know about that have not been able to pass the exam they needed to take, whether it was teaching or funeral directing and embalming or professional engineering, and can't do what they want to do for a living because of an exam. Okay. And content is important, right? But what happens is basically 1 in 3 candidates for any standardized test exam don't pass on their first attempt. 1 in 3. We're talking huge numbers. Okay. People don't talk about that. Okay. And then what is talked about even less is when you take the exam again, when you're a repeat test taker, pass rates can drop below 50%. Okay. So what that means is fail rates are greater than 50%. Right. And this is life changing, right? If you can't get past the I'm going to do things like I've always done, or I just need to study harder, or it was this topic I didn't know, right? Doing things again and again the same way isn't a strategy. And it can be really hard to hear, but you need to adjust how you're approaching it a little bit to try to get different results. Okay. So this is one of the patterns I see in test takers, one of the 5 patterns. Okay. I call it the wall hitter. So the wall hitter is where that's what it feels like, right? Like you have done all the studying, you have put in the time, you've put in the effort, and you fail again. Okay. Or you fail for the first time. You are not the problem. Okay. Your approach needs to just be changed. Okay. So, um, yes. So basically, some good news. So that wall hitter, that wall isn't permanent. And there's actually 3 things that most test prep programs never talk about. So that's what I'm going to go through a little bit today. And then please join me for the episode that we have Mel on again to talk about her approach and how her life has changed, right? Post test passing. Okay. So 3 things that I think will really help. Um, the first thing you need to do is you actually need to separate yourself from what happened on test day. Okay. You are not your score. You are not a failure. You failed a test. Big difference. Basically, you already have passed the test. You just need time to catch up with that truth, right? Like you need to think about that um, you can't let the test define you. You are an amazing person. You are smart. You know what's on the test, and that's very different than failing, right? So basically, a test tests how well you take a test, not how well you know the material. And so realizing that just because you failed doesn't mean you don't know the stuff can really help and actually needs to help in order to separate from what happened. Okay. Um, you need to release what you've been holding on to, is the second step. So the shame, the embarrassment, the frustration, the grief, um, all of that those are all emotions that you need to have and that you should have when you get bad news. When you found out that all the effort you put in, you have to go back and do it again, right? And those emotions get stored in your nervous system. And that could be for months, it could be for years. If you do not release all of that and work through all of that, it shows up during the test, right? So I've talked about fight or flight mode and what can happen, right? This is all related to that. And so working through, so whether it's like basically emotional regulation, you need to do breathing exercises or somatic release or journaling, mindset type activities. And you need to basically clear this energy. Okay. I know that sounds very woo woo. I promise it makes a difference. And we can have Belle address that too, but I promise it makes a difference. You cannot study your way out of your nervous system being in survival mode. And so that's why you need to release it. And then the third thing is that you need to trust yourself again. And that trust took a hit when you didn't pass. Okay. So building back that trust is going to be important for when you're going through the test again and you get to a question that you might be 50-50 on. You cannot be thinking, last time I had a similar problem, and so I probably got that wrong. So I'm going to change my answer based off of something that you don't even know if that's the question you got wrong, right? So in order to trust yourself again, um, the fastest way to do that is to build small successes, and adding those successes together is what is going to build your confidence. So things like, oh, you got a problem right, yay, when you're going through and practicing. You sat down to study and you didn't get that ick feeling in your stomach. You understand a new topic. You journaled to try to like go back and release the feelings that you were feeling when you took the test, or releasing the feelings that you felt when you got those results. Like all of these little things, studying and non-studying things, are what's going to end up building that trust back. Okay, if any of this sounds familiar, I encourage you to check out mytutor.com, the number 2tor.com, to take a quick, less than 2 minute quiz to figure out if wall hitter is actually one of the five types that you actually are. And it'll give you even more advice and things to do. So I really hope you join me for the Mel episode coming up, to get more from her. But just realize we need to normalize the fail. Okay. And one thing that actually kind of encompasses all of this and how much it's actually affected Mel is that she shared with me that now that she's hiring some people, that's actually one of the questions she asked during an interview. You, please tell me about a time that you failed at something, right? It could be baking a cake. It could be like anything, right? It doesn't have to be related to a test, but normalizing that fail, because that's where we grow and we learn new things. And yeah, we figure out more about who we are. So thank you for joining me on this episode of the Assessment Alchemist podcast, and I'll see you soon.